Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, what happens if billions of dollars in U.S. aid suddenly stops?
This is really an insurrection that happened on January 6th. This is right now a coup of the government that is being carried out by Elon Musk.
What the changes at USAID could mean for the United States and the rest of the world. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take.
Breaking overnight, workers at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, in Washington were told to stay home this morning. The main office closed. They received an email shortly after midnight telling them, don't come in.
In the early morning hours of Saturday, February 1st, personnel acting on behalf of the world's richest man, who is acting on behalf of the President of the United States, barged their way into secure areas of USAID.
Elon Musk has been tasked by President Trump to downsize the federal government and bring it in line with Trump's America First policies.
The opposition usually doesn't work on the weekend, but we do, Elon Musk posted on X. It was part of a broader effort to bring the agency to heel and possibly shut it down. U.S. President Donald Trump also attacked the organization.
It's been run by a bunch of radical lunatics, and we're getting them out. USAID, run by radical lunatics, and we're getting them out, and then we'll make a decision.
So now the fate of the agency providing almost half of the world's humanitarian aid hangs in the balance.
I was born and raised in India, did all my schooling in India. So I've had the opportunity to see firsthand what policies of the West do to countries which gain freedom and yet remain colonized. So that led to me wanting to investigate and understand how so-called development happens or does not happen, and found myself in the United States, which is really the belly of the beast.
My guest today is someone who has been working in international development for a few decades.
I'm Anuradha Mittal. I'm executive director of the Oakland Institute, and I'm based in Oakland, California.
So, Anuradha, USAID is at the center of this political barrage right now. You've researched and studied aid and how it's distributed around the world. You lived in India and Africa. This is a debate that's playing out in D.C., but it's a different story when you see the people that are affected if, a clinic is shut down, for example. How have you seen USAID make a difference?
Well, USAID is the world's largest humanitarian aid agency. This is an agency that was created in the 60s, 1961. It has played a very key role when it comes to vaccine distribution. If you think of eradication of smallpox, the disease which was eradicated in 11 years. If we just move forward and look back to, COVID, the role played by USAID in getting COVID vaccines to low-income countries. Or if we look at the AIDS epidemic, even today, people depend on their medications for HIV, for tuberculosis. Also think of sanitation programs, clean water programs, or think of people displaced due to war in whether it's Ukraine, whether it is DRC. This is an agency which has played a key role since the 1960s.
Wow, so we're talking smallpox, we're talking HIV, and recently COVID. So the examples are numerous, and they are, in some cases, very, very recent. One more example, Ebola. We're hearing about Ebola in Uganda. It's suspected again in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC.
Yeah, here is a country which has the largest number of displaced population. You have internally displaced people because of the war and conflict, because again of the Western politics, which are right now supporting Rwanda, which is supporting M23 rebellion. So imagine these IDP camps and not having resources for sanitation, for medical help. In the midst of that, a crisis like Ebola spreading, it's not going to be contained within DRC. It's going to spread across borders. So we're talking about definitely children dying, but we're also talking about diseases like Ebola spreading and not being able to be contained. Now, when you take away aid, when you take away those more programs that are funding mobile clinics, that are making sure that the victims have immediate help, psychological help, and other medications that are needed, we make this world a very dangerous place. We are leaving the most vulnerable victims who have been exposed to things like sexually, assaults, and then not to provide aid. It is heart-wrenching. And I think it's also, we have to remember, United States wants to be the superpower in the world. United States wants to be the one who polices the rest of the world. And to walk away from its responsibility after funding the wars that it has, it is a real threat to United States. It turns itself, instead of a democracy, into an authoritarian regime which is being run by oligarchs like Elon Musk.
So then you have the president of the United States who's calling the people who work at USAID, who dispense this assistance we're talking about, he's calling them lunatics. If USAID were to be dismantled, which is starting to seem like a real possibility, I mean, tell me about some of these individuals who would be affected. What would that mean?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to think about the most vulnerable, the most marginalized populations that are going to be impacted globally. You have children, you have mothers, you have elderly, you have patients who have depended, who have built this relationship with the United States. When this aid arrives, it comes from the American people. So there are two parties that are impacted. One is on the receiving end, those who are facing disease, who are hungry, who need clean water. But the other side that will be impacted is the American people. Foreign aid has been the tool to sway people's minds and hearts. That's why it was created during the Cold War, to win over nations towards the side of the United States, to suddenly, with an executive order, with a blink of an executive order, to remove that help, basically threatens not just communities worldwide, but the United States itself. Then talking about Donald Trump calling people who are working at USAID, these are seasoned, civil officers, to be calling people who have dedicated their lives to foreign services, to the State Department, to call them lunatics is very dangerous.
We are reading stories about staffers faced with this question: defy Trump by stopping operations or let 100 babies die. Does that ring true to you?
This is a very difficult time for people and officers with USAID. We tend to imagine that everyone is working from Washington, D.C., but there's a reality on the ground. It's staff who are in countries where we are seeing hundreds, not just hundreds, actually thousands of children who are at the risk of dying. The USAID basically works through bureaus, and they have offices in different countries. I don't have the exact figures of the number of employees, but we're talking about thousands of employees, thousands of contractors who have been impacted. But I think the other big issue is USAID constitutes less than 1% of the federal budget. Less than 1% of the federal budget. So if we are talking about the Department of Government efficiency, really wanting to make things efficient, they would be tackling Department of Defense, whose budget is, many, many times over.
Yeah. I mean, let's not forget that Elon Musk is a beneficiary of those kind of Defense Department grants and subsidies. More with Anuradha after the break. Anuradha, the USAID is hardly above criticism. Much of what you do, I know, involves investigating its shortcomings. And while it is an aid organization, it also serves as a tool of U.S. soft power. The Oakland Institute that you run it takes a strong anti-colonial stance, and there are clear colonial dynamics in the way that this soft power operates. Just give us a sense of what your issues are, your concerns that you've raised about USAID over the years.
Well, USAID was created, as I said before, in 1960s, in 1961, during the Cold War. And it has been the tool of U.S. foreign policy. So on one hand, it has provided aid for disaster relief, for diseases. But at the same time, it has been the tool to promote U.S. agenda. For instance, promoting, through the World Bank, privatization of land. We have seen indigenous communities in Tanzania, in Kenya being removed from their lands. So at the Oakland Institute, we have challenged USAID for policies which, continue to promote Western capitalist agenda.
Yeah, so as somebody who has criticized USAID over the years, what do you make of what's happening now? It's not that you want the entire thing shut down, you just want it to be reformed.
Well, of course, there are problems with USAID because it has been a tool of, US hegemony around the world to pushing down its policies, whether it is to expand industrial agriculture, whether it is to expand forest conservation. But this is not the case of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Definitely, the institution needs to be reformed to continue to become better at providing relief, and meeting needs of the communities who are hurting rather than hurting them. Right now, some of the institutions that are being shut down are clinics, for instance, that are providing prosthetic limbs to Ukrainian veterans. You're talking about creating and supporting a genocide in Gaza and at the same time then providing aid to the people suffering in Gaza. So given the kind of misery we have around the world, the needs that we have from DRC to Yemen to Afghanistan, it is immoral and wrong for the United States to suddenly turn into a rogue state, a pariah state.
Yeah, and there's no question that aid to Israel will continue throughout all this debate. So I think you've been reading the news like we are. On Monday, after the drama of the weekend, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was named acting administrator of USAID.
This frustration has existed now for almost a quarter century, and multiple administrations that have gone through this challenge. It's going to stop and it's going to end. There are things that it does that are good, and there are things that it does that we have strong questions about. It's about the way it operates as an entity.
We heard your critique of USAID. I'm wondering what you make of their critique. What do you make of the critiques you're hearing from the right?
Well, the right would say that we have to get rid of USAID. We have to stop helping people around the world. We have to put America first. Now, I have never heard anything as ridiculous as that. So, in fact, by doing away with USAID, you're not making America first, you're hurting America.
Yeah.
Not to mention the diseases that will not stop at the border of the United States.
We've talked about the moral case for foreign aid, vaccinating babies, but there is a realist case as well, and you've just touched on that. I mean, aside from the fact that preventing disease abroad prevents disease in the U.S., there's also a China angle that you're hearing a lot in D.C. these days. I know the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee talked about USAID being the counter to Belt and Road, for example.
I have felt for a long time that USAID is our way to combat the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's effort to really gain influence around the world, including Africa and South America and the Western Hemisphere. So we need an aid program to match the Chinese effort.
In the absence of USAID, does China fill that void, and what would that look like?
Well, honestly, this talk from Washington, D.C., we have to understand that this is not a monopoly board. This is not about if U.S. exits, China moves in, this power-mongering and war-mongering. Of course, I think there are going to be opportunities for other nations to step up, as they should, because they are representing themselves as members of the international community. And the Western nations, like the United States, which have tried to challenge China by showing themselves to be a little more gentler, a little more kinder, the fact is they remain colonial powers.
The 2017 Trump tax cuts are set to expire. And now the richest man in the world is going around finding places to cut government services. Services that we've mentioned include vaccinations, disease prevention, in part to find offsets to help pay for renewing those tax cuts, which overwhelmingly benefit wealthy people like himself. Do I have that right? Is that really the timeline that we're living in? Can you believe this is happening?
Well, it is not surprising at all. But what I think is really shocking is, again, USAID, USAID is less than 1% of the US federal budget. If Elon Musk, the richest man on earth, is looking for making cuts and finding other ways, that is not the place to start. What is really coming through is not just his lack of intelligence, but supposedly a very smart man, but really a lack of heart, his mean-spiritedness, the mega right-wing agenda, which is anti-people, which is anti-children and anti-women. That's what's really coming through. And of course, to ensure that the rich like him are not taxed.
What do you say to those people you're seeing protesting outside of USAID? Do you think there's hope?
Well, I'm glad to see people who are speaking out, but it is going to be really important that not just both the Republicans and the Democrats stop being afraid of these oligarchs. This is really about United States democracy at stake. The attacks that we're seeing on USAID are being made by a person who was not elected by Americans. He's not been formally appointed to the Department of Government Efficiency. This is really an insurrection that happened on January 6th. This is right now a coup of the government that is being carried out by Elon Musk.
And that's the take. Look, the news is coming in so quickly these days, it's sometimes hard to keep up. So thanks for stopping here for a few minutes to slow down and look at what the issues are and who they affect around the world. We want to know, is there something we should be covering more of or less of? Let us know in the comments below. We'll have a look and we'll be back tomorrow.